Thank you very much, Jane. And I'm delighted to be able to introduce Madelyn Postman, because Madelyn is somebody who's been fairly steeped in her topic for a number of decades now. And I always like a speaker like that because they've got a range of info. I think the key thing to know about Madelyn is she has worked in sustainability for a while, but she's got a long period of time. She was involved in the textile industry and in brands. So she's got a marketing and brands, and she thought, I could put this to use more in the sustainability, because she was thinking about particularly an incident she gives where she threw some rubbish in a bin and a friend quipped, out of sight, out of mind. And I think when it comes to your clothes, you don't think what's going to happen to your clothes once you chuck them out. They're finished with in your mind. They're not a big thing. But when you think of all the clothes that we get rid of over the years and all the clothes we discard that we don't even buy, and neither does anybody else. So it means fashion, very important. The other important thing is Madelyn runs her own consultancy with some colleagues, and she's a founding partner called Grain, and she's got a nice little grain there at the back of her, back on her shelving. But she's also the first European member of the 1% Planet. She's on the steering committee for the 1%, which are companies that are putting 1% of their profit into planet and sustainability projects. And so this is, for me, a really big new idea is actually to commit a part of your profit. I think you may have spied Madelyn. She gets comments on the BBC News, BBC World, and she lectures on sustainable fashion at University East London. She also speaks several languages, and she's writing a book about her own family's roots in California, Poland, Lithuania, and China. So she's a woman of many parts. But tonight we're delighted to invite Madelyn to talk to us about what is sustainable fashion? How can we tap into it better? Thank you, Madelyn.
Thank you so much, Rosie. That was a really kind introduction. I will share slides immediately because there's quite a lot of, well, hopefully good images coming from my branding and design background, and lots of information as well. So starting with sustainability and fashion, and a broader intro to Grain sustainability as well. And I'll speak for a second about Sustainable Amersham too, before we get into the main part of the talk. So Grain as a consultancy was founded in 2002 as a branding and design consultancy. And then we started working more and more in brand strategy, which led to trying to really change the way businesses operate. So that's what led into sustainability. So going from branding to sustainability doesn't seem that straightforward at first until you understand that it was through the brand strategy piece and wanting to make more of a fundamental difference rather than sort of just make something. Branding isn't just about making things look pretty, but we wanted to get past that level and get more deeply into the way that our clients operate. So personally, before Grain, I worked in design, and I was at Gucci Group for quite a few years. And that was not in fashion design, but in branding and basically everything that had the Gucci logo on it, except for the products. So things like packaging and advertising campaigns. And it was Gucci Group. So it was also like Sergio Rossi, Gucci Corporate. And back to Grain. So our mission is to help organizations champion people and the planet. As Rosie mentioned, we're members of 1% for the Planet. And it's not often that you can make 1% seem bigger than it is, but it's actually 1% of turnover that 1% members give to environmental nonprofits. So those are approved environmental nonprofits. And so the real power of 1% is that partnership between business and nonprofits. And that could be a whole other talk. And I sit on the board so I'm American, but I'm the first board member to be based outside of the US. So it is 1% was founded in the US, also in 2002, quite handily for me to see how old grain is and how old 1% for the planet is. And it has been a bit US centric, but now more than half of members are outside of the US. So it's important. I'm sort of like the international voice on the board. We're also a certified B Corporation. Hands up if you know what a B Corp is. Okay, so yeah, B Corporation. So it's a B Corporation meets high environmental and social standards. And it's actually, the impact areas are across 5 areas for B Corp. So it's governance, workers, environment, community, and customers. And it's this B logo. And now that I've pointed it out, hopefully you'll see it everywhere. March was just B Corp month. And then going on to Sustainable Amersham. So as it says in the name, local sustainability group. And we have, it's quite organized after a few years, different groups of one called Learn and Act, which is around essentially communications. There's a book club, there's a Wild Amersham part, which is around biodiversity, Repair Cafe, plastic free group, which is probably becoming a sort of more around waste and reuse. It's sort of shifting at the moment, and a green energy group as well. And it's all volunteer members working with local organizations. And so just something else to get involved with. If you'd like, you can ask for more info. Or sustainableamersham.org is the website. So moving into fashion. So this is a graph from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and we'll look a little bit more at the work of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation in a few slides, of the change in fashion consumption from 2000 to 2015. So you can see that consumption is going up, it's doubled. And of course, by now it's even more than that since 2000, whereas the number of times each single piece of clothing is worn is going down. So, those are not really going in the right direction, those two trends. And also before we look at, so today we'll be looking at 3 main problems in fashion and 3 main solutions. And just another slide before we look at the 3 main problems is the basic way that generally we use things, consume things. So there's the linear model, which is take, make, use, and waste. It's not regenerative, it just sort of goes in one direction. It's, many resources are finite, so it's not sustainable. The recycling economy adds a bit of a loop into that, where you might recycle something like, particularly something like PET, is relatively easy to recycle, glass, aluminum, those sorts of materials. Clothing is notoriously difficult to recycle, but that's the recycling economy. And in a way, it's quite dangerous because many times when we talk about sustainability or plastics, you just think, well, if I recycle, there's that typical, 3-arrow symbol, everything will be fine. But it's not quite, because it's still, things get downcycled and end up in landfill, or in Bucks, most things are incinerated. It's energy to waste. Tour Great Moor, if you haven't been there, it's amazing. It's the energy to waste facility near Aylesbury. Then the circular economy, and again, we'll see a little bit more about this later, is where you keep materials in use and you design out waste, and you're really aiming to keep that bin completely empty. And it's not always easy, and many times it means simply using less, because there's energy. It takes resources to make things. It takes energy to recycle things. So if we reduce consumption, that's one simple way to help with everything in terms of emissions and the use of resources and waste and pollution. So there are 3 main problems with fashion. It's said to be the 2nd most polluting industry after oil and gas. So the first problem is resources. To make a single pair of jeans alone, it can take up to 2,000 gallons of water. It doesn't really mean much, 2,000 gallons, but this is a 2,000-gallon container. So that gives you an idea of the water needed for one pair of jeans. And textile production uses approximately 93 cubic meters of water annually. That's 4% of the world's freshwater withdrawal. Another massive problem is waste, emissions, and pollution. So fashion's oversupply problem is creating an environmental disaster. About 40% of clothes made every year, that's 60 billion garments, are not sold. And transparency about production volumes is central to assessing and tackling the scope of fashion's environmental problems. Fast fashion, this idea of fast fashion, has created an increasingly fast retail cycle fueled by frequent deliveries of new products, which may or may not sell. And clothes are increasingly seen as being disposable, particularly in wealthy countries. And we don't see supply chains. They're hidden from consumers and also misunderstood by consumers. More than $500 billion worth of clothes are dumped because of clothing underutilization and the lack of recycling. And in the UK, about 140 million pounds worth of clothing is sent to UK landfill each year. About 85% of textiles are thrown away to landfill or incinerated annually. And it can take an item of clothing up to 200 years to biodegrade. That's, we're not even talking about things like microplastics. So this picture is from South America. It's from Chile. Chile has the laxest import regulations in South America. It imports about 60,000 tons of clothes per year, mostly from the US, Europe, and Asia. The clothes are of such low quality that they can't be sold. They get illegally dumped in the Atacama Desert, which is the driest place in the world. And they often get burnt, which of course releases greenhouse gases, as well as toxic fumes. I forgot to mention at the beginning of the talk, actually, that it's Fashion Revolution Week this week. So we had originally scheduled it for last week. So it's really appropriate that it's happening this week. In terms of greenhouse gas emissions, the fashion industry accounts for about 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And this is just increasing by potentially about 50% by 2030, which isn't too far off. Then, oops, sorry. In terms of water pollution, the fashion industry contributes to about 20% of all industrial water pollution. So I think part of, in the introduction, Rosie was saying that we often don't really think about our clothes when we throw them away. And I think it's often, we give them to Oxfam or to another charity and we sort of think that all is well because we feel sort of worthy and, something's happening with them. Only about 10 to 30% of charity donations are resold in store. And there was an investigation last year by the Changing Markets Foundation, and they put air tags in 21 garments, donated them to fashion retailers, and these were about 3/4 were tracked to shredding landfill or burning sites. So they weren't, they didn't end up where consumers thought they would end up. And only about 1/5 of them were actually reused or resold in Europe. So our third massive problem with fashion is human rights. And that is actually what's behind Fashion Revolution Week. So in April 2013, there was the Rana Plaza collapse in Bangladesh. It was due to there were poor building regulations. Over 1,000 workers were killed and many more were injured. And so the Fashion Revolution Week this year is the 15th to the 24th of April. And factories in the global south are desirable for big brands because they have poor environmental and safety regulations and much cheaper labor. The brands often are not paying a living wage. and workers worldwide are exploited due to poor labor standards. And again, there's not a lot of visibility on supply chains. So what are some of the solutions? So before we dive into those, again, we'll look at a couple of systemic questions. First of all, has anybody heard about the, I'm blinking now on the name of it, I've completely blanked on the name of what it is, but it's, I want to call it the triangle of blame, but I don't think it's called the triangle of blame. Wait a second, let me just look in my file so I can give you the right name. Climate risk resources. Oh, okay, sorry, it's called the triangle of inaction. I knew it was a triangle. Has anybody heard of that before?
No.
So it's essentially where, as you can see illustrated here, individuals blame companies. So we say, well, the clothes are too expensive, or I'm being marketed, to buy these clothes, or, I don't understand what I'm buying because I'm being promised one thing, but it's something else. The companies blame the consumers. They say, oh, but it's the consumers who are asking us to produce these things. We have consumer demand. We have to meet it so we can make money. The individuals might blame the government, saying we don't have enough regulation to keep a handle on this. The government blames individuals, oh, there's, again, maybe not enough interest, or we have other priorities, or whatever it might be. And you can imagine between government and companies and government. So the idea is really to break this triangle of inaction and take action within your sphere of influence. So what can you do? Stop blaming other people, ideally band together if you want to campaign against the government, or within your own sphere of influence, you can buy less. We'll look at some other solutions as well. So to keep in mind this model. Then what about the circular economy? Has anyone heard of the circular economy? Yep. Anybody feel like they want to know more about it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, great. So the three main principles of the circular economy, so it wasn't sort of invented by Ellen MacArthur, but you can imagine as Dame Ellen was on her boat, that that was her whole world. She had finite resources. She was really dependent on her team and their knowledge, and she could also certainly see effects of climate change and pollution. But if you think of our whole planet being a bit like that, just one vessel with finite resources, some resources like sun and wind we have that are renewable, but it's like my friend chucking the thing in the bin and saying out of sight, out of mind, and it's not. It's still on the planet. Whatever plastic or paper might have been used, that's been used. Something needs to happen to it. So Ellen MacArthur set up the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which champions the circular economy. They do a lot of research in all different sectors. So I highly recommend going onto the Ellen MacArthur Foundation website, because there are a ton of resources there. And one of the main industries that they look at about maybe 9 or so industries. Like, it's not just fashion, but they do look at fashion specifically. And actually that first graph I showed of the consumption and the use per piece, that came from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation as well. So the 3 principles of the circular economy as set out by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation are to eliminate waste and pollution, to circulate products and materials at their highest value, so not avoiding downcycling, where you might have like a PET water bottle, clear plastic water bottle, recycled into polyester. That's essentially downcycling, because what's going to happen to that polyester piece of clothing after that? It's not going to become a water bottle again. It's unlikely to become another piece of clothing again. It's very likely to be incinerated or to go into landfill at the end of its life. And then the third is to regenerate nature. And the one other way of eliminate waste and pollution is to design out waste and pollution, because a product's impact, it's something like 80% is determined at the design stage. So you really need to design a product to be circular. It doesn't just sort of become circular like magically. And then looking a little bit more into circular fashion or circular business models in fashion, this comes from the Ellen MacArthur website. So these are some ideas. So more use per user, that's quite straightforward. More users per product, so that would be like the sharing economy. So for example, Selfridges has a certain percentage of the store is going to be rental clothing. So that's one model of more uses per product. And then beyond physical products is quite interesting because it could be something digital. So for example, you could have digital clothes. If you think of an influencer on TikTok or Instagram or whatever, they might just want to have a digital look or digital outfit. They don't need to own the clothing to put that image up on whatever platform they're on. So that's one idea of using digital solutions to make more sustainable fashion, or fashion with a lower impact. Then there's another example where so for marketing, advertising, I know there's a lot of controversy as well, because what if you use AI models, and so none of this is without controversy, but this particular company gives away 3D pattern files to digital creators, and then again it's making digital garments. And then there are all kinds of things like digital, pattern cutting and optimization of patterns, and digital printing. And so, there's a lot of potential in digital uses of fashion. I just did an academic review of the fashion department at the University of East London last week, and they're using a lot of these digital, I mean, not these kinds of examples, but more like the pattern making and printing. They also have a natural dye garden there, and they're using biodegradable materials and lots of stuff. So it's pretty cool. So getting into some of the solutions. So one, it's just really simple, is to buy less. And this goes for a lot of consumption of all kinds of products. It's cheaper, it's easier, it takes less time. It's a matter of sort of resisting that pull of marketing and wanting to treat yourself to something, whatever it might be. So I won't say too much about this because it's just, again, it's quite straightforward in a way. Then from this is again from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. So it's a model of having more of that clothing utilization, less production. So if you're buying less, using less resources, and then having these business models that are in line with that, so your revenue is going up. And I wonder if they meant to make it like an Argyle pattern. In terms of, where are we? Secondhand clothing. So again, this is, it's buying less or buying less new, at least. So among the different platforms, these are the 4, well, Depop isn't so rated so highly. Anyway, these are 4 that are rated highly by Ethical Consumer. So the scores here at the right are the scores on Ethical Consumer from their new scale, which is out of 100. Their old scale used to be out of 20. This is out of 100. So these are sort of the names to jot down. I use one called Thrift Plus. It's thrift.plus, and it wasn't rated on Ethical Consumer, but I just find it quite easy to use. So actually, I think everything I'm wearing today happens to be from Thrift Plus. It's a great way to get really good quality clothes and it's they're really inexpensive as well, and you're getting from the fabrics things like cashmere. And so in terms of fabrics, these are just in order, this is taken from Ethical Consumer as well. In terms of using organic and recycled materials, the natural materials that don't have different kinds of plastic in them. And then this, for example, is interesting in conversion cotton because there's a certain amount of time, I think it's 3 years, when before the cotton producers can be organic, but during that conversion period, they still need a demand for the material. So if you're using in conversion cotton, then it's creating that demand that for cotton that will eventually become organic cotton, which is here. So materials, and then this is an app and the website that rates brands. So it's quite good. I haven't sort of compared it to the ethical consumer rankings, but it's quite good to find some information on brands if you just want to look up a brand that you come across. It's got small brands and high street brands and lots of different ones, plus extra info. So the second solution is caring for your clothes. So if you're buying less and trying to use your clothes more, of course, you need to take care of them more. Ideally, you're buying higher quality clothes. This method is a Japanese sort of embellishment and repair method called sashiko. Just, it looks really beautiful. And in terms of the care, so you would want to wash your clothes as little as possible. That's why this is a video call. And your clothes generally probably need less washing than you think. You can sort of air them out, and every time you wash your clothes, it's wearing down the clothes, you're using energy. Microplastics might be released depending on the fabric, and you might need to repair them. And knowing how to repair your clothes, either directly or using a repair cafe, or just there's a tailor up in Amersham. So we bring a lot of stuff to him. So it doesn't have to be a repair cafe, even though I know we all love our repair cafes. And you can dry clothes on a line rather than using a tumble dryer. You can use a dehumidifier instead of a tumble dryer. It uses less energy. Maybe you've got solar panels, and then you can use your dehumidifier at night or something. Use low temperatures as well. I think we've all sort of heard these different care options. And then you can use slower spin cycles too. And then in terms of microplastics, there's a bag called Guppy Friend, Guppy like the fish, Guppy Friend, and that captures microplastics. Eventually, washing machines will probably be all fitted with filters for microplastics, but that's not a sort of off-the-shelf sort of thing right now. And the higher quality clothes you buy, the better they'll stay. They won't be misshapen, for example, with higher quality. And you can also upcycle, cropping, personalizing, dyeing clothes, and thinking about, keeping them and maybe refreshing them for your own use. And then finally, we have sharing. So I mentioned Selfridges earlier. There are other sites that rent clothes. So there's one called Hurt, H-U-R-T. There's My Wardrobe HQ. John Lewis also has clothing rental. So just something to think of if you want, particularly for things like special occasions. I know that, the people had press for renting their wedding dresses, for example. So just something to consider is clothing rental. Then this is a great graphic from Fashion Revolution, which began after the Rana Plaza disaster, what people think sustainable fashion is versus what it really is. So it's not about buying, 200-pound Stella McCartney, whatever, or more, maybe even more expensive, or, fast fashion, sustainable, like H&M conscious collection or whatever that's called. You don't have to be wearing a hemp sack to be sustainable, but it's really, just wearing the clothes you already have, thrifting. When you do buy something new, look into their ethics, and just starting with B Corp is a great way to go, for example, or use the Good On You website, or look at ethical consumer when you're purchasing. Mending, washing with care, turning your old clothes into rags, borrowing. So those are some pointers. And then in terms of resources, there are a couple of documentaries which are really good. The True Cost, and then Fashion Reimagined is also very good. In terms of books, Lucy Siegel is a journalist. She wrote To Die For, Is Fashion Wearing Out the World? All of Safia Mini's books and all of her work, if you sort of follow her and what she's doing. She's sort of like the queen of sustainable fashion. She's the founder of People Tree, and she was involved with Pozu shoes as well. But People Tree is like, I think it's completely, well, it's not completely vertically integrated, but the supply chain is, you know, they know exactly who made every piece of clothing, and they visit the factories, and they, you know, it's just like a model of the way a brand should be. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation website, also in terms of brands, there's Mud Jeans, Mud, M-U-D. They're based in the Netherlands, and I think it's quite hard to get them here now with Brexit, but it's good to look at them. They're very circular. It was born with a circular economy in mind, so it's good to look at Mud Jeans. Websites, Ellen MacArthur Foundation, WRAP, which is Waste and Resources Action Program. If you just Google like Oxfam Sustainable Fashion, you'll get a lot of good articles. Same for BBC Sustainable Fashion, just as a Google search, and the Fashion Revolution website as well. And then, not specifically fashion, but around carbon emissions, it's great to look at doing a workshop. So there's one called Climate Fresk, which is a 3-hour workshop. We hold them online every month. Our next one is on May 17th. It's based on the information from the IPCC assessment reports. So the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change assessment reports, which are scientific papers that they don't commission, but they're independently assessed scientific papers, and you learn the cause and effect of emissions and essentially the science behind climate change. And then there's a creativity section, an information, an emotion sharing section, and then an action section where you look at specific actions that you can do on climate change. So it's a really powerful workshop. Again, 17th of May. If you look on the GRAIN website, that I'll have a link in a sec, then that's up there. And so this is the GRAIN website. If you go there, and then there's an events page that's got a link to the Climate Fresk information. And the Fresk is the first 3 hours of an 8-hour carbon literacy training. And for example, Safia Mini has got her own carbon literacy training on fashion specifically too. So if you're interested in that more specifically, that's available. Then, yeah, generally for GRAIN, I would say, you know, there are a lot of resources on the GRAIN site. There's a link in the footer that says resources. And then any business or nonprofit or trade association, you know, who wants to have a chat about sustainability strategies, carbon footprinting, training, communications, we'd love to have a chat with them. And Sustainable Amersham as well, if you want another community group to be involved with some talks and lots of different, we have our own repair cafe as well, and lots of different activities there. So those are a couple of the contacts, and ready for questions.
Thank you very much indeed. There was an awful lot of information there I didn't know.
Yeah.
Imagine that probably went for everybody else as well. We've already got loads of questions in the chat. So what do you think, Rosie? Do you want to?
Yep, I'll pick a few up then. So right at the beginning, we talked about the water prepared jeans, and Henrietta asked, can this be recycled as a closed loop process? And if not, why not?
Can the water be reused?
Yeah, can you just keep recycling the water, you know, presumably removing whatever chemicals and things it's taking out and cleaning it up and then reusing the water?
I don't know the direct answer to that question, so I feel like anything I say, I'd be making it up. But I would say probably if you look at the Mud Jeans website, I'll look that up and stick it in the chat. I would think that they have information on it, or yeah. So that, yeah, the short answer is I don't know. I'm just always tempted to start making up answers, but I'm going to keep myself from doing that.
Okay. And the question is, when you do give your old clothes to local authority textiles recycling facilities, what actually happens to them?
So I know that some get downcycled into things like insulation. And I'm just thinking of one of our clients, they're in they do branded merchandise, sort of specialized in mostly caps and some beanies. And they have a company called Avena who collect their waste. And they have most of it going into, let me see if I can find that quickly. Most of it is being essentially downcycled. So the actual recycling of clothes, from what I know, is there's a sort of mechanical process where you have to sort them very carefully, you know, the cotton and the mixed and polyesters, and then they're broken down into just fibers and then sort of respun. You can find videos of it on YouTube. And then I think there's a sort of chemical recycling process. And I know there's a chemical recycling process with plastics. I'm not quite sure how it works with textiles, but it's not the most straightforward thing to do, essentially. So it, you know, it doesn't happen very much. It's a very small percentage, like low single digit percentage of clothes that get actually recycled that way from like one fabric made into another fabric, whereas you know, reused is different, or customized, things like that. So let me see if I can find this quickly, because it's quite interesting to see what happens with the this particular
So the big message is try and get as much wear out your clothes, swap it with someone else, all those things before it goes anywhere near the recycling. So it's a last resort.
Yes. So this is, I'll share this presentation. So this is the company that they also collect things like documents and shred documents, but they've got this sort of arm that collects textiles as well. And so, well, this says, they say 1% of clothes are recycled effectively. And then, so collect the shredding of the fiber extraction, and then they recycle back. But that's only a small, do they have it in here? So the reusing, which in the case of like the caps, they wouldn't necessarily be reused because they're samples that they're not allowed to reuse because the logo's been put on wrong or something like that. This is essentially the downcycling, where they might make it into insulation, geotextiles, wall partition, soundboarding, and then this is basically energy from waste. It's incinerated or melted. They've got these, I don't have it here. Yeah, they've got these little like pellets. They can, you know, this isn't necessarily incineration. They can make the polyester into plastic pellets, which is another way of recycling. But again, it's, yeah.
Okay.
Doesn't happen much.
Now a couple of us who are in, shall we say, in a more older generation, we want to know, we don't really get, I can't imagine what digital fashion actually is. And Jane's asked specifically, how do digital patterns help the cause? So could you just say a little bit more so we get an idea of what does a digital fashion product look like?
Yes.
And where is it used?
So the first parts that I was talking about with the slides of the, you know, being an influencer and wearing a digital outfit, that's, it's almost like virtual reality. It's not quite virtual reality, but it's sort of like if you can picture you and then say like, in Photoshop, you mock yourself up with a different outfit on, and then you share that image on social media. So that's one aspect of it, where you're sharing an image of something that doesn't exist in reality. So that's one application of it. in terms of efficiencies and pattern cutting and things like that, when you're making a garment, when you're designing a garment from scratch, you make a pattern and you make toiles, which are the like a it's the patterns that like it's like a mock-up of the garment, you could say. So and that takes, it takes fabric and it takes it takes physical materials. But if rather than doing that, if you're doing it on a model, like let's say on a 3D model on your computer, then you're saving that material. So you're doing it digitally rather than making this material. Or if you've got a big roll of fabric, there are programs that can optimize, if you think of all the shapes of a shirt or something, and maybe the pattern has to be matched up and things like that, the pattern on the design, whatever, has to be matched up, then if you just do that with your own knowledge, you might not get it as efficient. You might have more offcuts than you could with a program that can optimize all of that and have as few offcuts as possible.
Yeah,
So
totally. I understand. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Or digitally printing, you just get like sort of one print run rather than having to print a whole loom of fabric.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, Cornelia has suggested ThreadUp is one in the USA. Can you just remind us, Cornelia, one what? I'm sorry, she's still with us.
Reseller, recycler of clothing to buy used fashion, like a giant online thrift store.
Yeah, fine. Thank you. Just wanted to check. I had a question for you about, a lot of people argue that if we buy less, and this argument goes obviously for meat and all kinds of products, but if we buy less, then a lot of people in low-income countries will have no income because they're depending on us doing that. And I just wonder, how do you answer that argument?
Well, it's a big question and a big problem because it really is systems change. So if you think of fast fashion, they're not earning a decent income. It's not because we're not buying enough fast fashion, it's because they're not getting paid enough. And because if we're trying to follow, 2-week or 6-week fashion cycles, with drops all the time and people trying to buy that. And then sometimes they're not, they didn't get paid at all because like during COVID, a lot of the brands didn't pay the factories because they didn't need the clothes. They just stuck them, they just didn't pay them. So it's the whole system that has to change. And, it won't change overnight, but we can try to make the brands more accountable and, just make them talk about what they're doing. And like there was the big problems with Boohoo and their supply chain, and then they're trying to be more trying to have their suppliers meet higher standards. And actually our client was a supplier to Boohoo, so we saw some of what Boohoo was doing in terms of trying to improve that. And that came from, it can come from news articles and investigative journalism, but it can also come from consumer pressure in terms of the way the brands are behaving. So I would say, look at some of these aspects and sort of focus on those and support the brands that are ethical, essentially, and paying the workers what they should be paid.
Yeah, it's all good points about there is this extended producer responsibility has been mentioned by Scuto, but there's also, we need to consider a little bit an extended consumer responsibility as well when it comes to our fashion. It's a good point. So Chris has made a lovely question. Is wool as a material one which you should avoid because of the carbon footprint of sheep? And if so, are sheep reared under solar panels okay?
Let me go back to my recycled wool. So I'm just going to share my so yeah, the carbon footprint of sheep. So I guess, it's interesting. So wool is here, sort of plain wool. And we've got organic wool here, and then recycled wool. So I think, all I could say is looking at this, then you would think yes, you would avoid sort of new wool that isn't organic, according to the information from Ethical Consumer. And then, yeah, I mean, it's an animal consuming food and creating emissions and needing water. And then you've got different questions like the water needed for denim and dyes, and every fabric has so many sort of, I guess, benefits and also problems associated with it. And what was I just thinking about? Denim and and then with wool, you've got is it called docking when the tails are cut, something like that? So there's sort of, animal rights issues as well. So yeah, I mean, I think none of these questions are simple. But yeah, so I would just on the simple line, I would go with this table and then sort of, look into it more for more information.
Okay, lovely, thank you. Peter asks us, 40% of garments never been sold. That's quite frightening. How can we environmental activists get into this supply chain and take some of this stock and upcycle it? So essentially, how do you get hold of it? And is it not getting sold because the industry's hanging on to it in some way for fear of it being essentially sold cheap, knocked off, whatever is the problem? So is got any more thoughts on why is it never getting sold, or is it just simply nobody wants to buy it in the first place?
I mean, one example is that Burberry was found out that they were burning a lot of their extra stock. So they're, in luxury, they were protecting their brand because they didn't want it to go onto the market, discounted or too cheap. But then once that was discovered, I don't know exactly how it was discovered, but again, it's, it could have been one person looking into it or a journalist or, I don't know who, but then, supposedly they stopped doing that. And so that would be one, again, it's sort of this, I suppose, pointing fingers and making sure that the brands are responsible for what they're doing. And then this other, systemic thing is that the brands are overproducing. I mean, the question is, what can we do to make a difference? And again, it's like these really big questions. And I suppose things like to almost take one issue and see what groups there are. So Fashion Revolution is very much around workers' rights. And then there are things like the Better Cotton Initiative and WRAP, and there are lots of businesses and nonprofits in the area. So I would say almost like pick a cause within that you're interested in. There's even like fair tax, which affects all companies. If there's a company like, Amazon that's not paying its tax and then they're profiting from fast fashion because they have all their own Amazon fashion brands as well. So, you have to almost like take one thing and sort of chip away at that, or join a group. We were saying at the beginning of the call that a lot of kids right now are really hopeless. Like they think that they don't even have a world to live in as adults. And that I think community really helps. So I'd say like find your fashion tribe start with an issue. Look at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation website and kind of just go with that to start with.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. Philip asks, could you explain a bit more about the Japanese repair process you showed, because it looks interesting?
Yeah, I mean, I know the name, the sashiko, and again, lots of these things you can sort of find tutorials and things like that online. So yes, sashiko, SASHIKO. And yeah, I would say again, sort of look for videos and things like that. When I was looking at it, didn't look too difficult to do it. So there.
I've written that one down along with my colleagues,
Like
Peter and Henry. Yeah. Peter and Henry, if we could note that one as possibles for our upcycling activities. Okay. Yep. Henrietta makes the point that sheep can grow on land that's difficult for anything else. So, yep, that's a good point.
I like that.
So Sarah's asking, I'm sitting here in a leather jacket, one of my 10 pairs of jeans, waiting for delivery from Shine. I'm one of the people who should really hear your message every day. I'm definitely moved to make a significant change. Thank you very much. So thank you very much indeed, Sarah, for that one. I really appreciate that. Good question from Jill. Is hemp grown in the UK?
I don't know. I would just Google it. Sorry. I was just at a conference in Paris a couple of weeks ago called Change Now, and there was a whole sustainable fashion section. It wasn't just about fashion, but it was they had a lot of different areas, and one was on sustainable fashion, and there was I went into it a little bit cynically because LVMH, the big luxury group, had a big presence there. They were, big sponsor, and then Pernod Ricard was there as well. And a lot of the sustainable fashion initiatives, so it was like different materials and things like that, were actually LVMH little like incubator projects. So, on one hand, it made me feel a bit cynical because I thought, they won't change the world because it's still a big luxury group, but they do have these projects and they're putting the investment in and trying to have them scale. And there is a sustainable, I have a photo, but it's going to take me too long to look it up. There is a group that focuses on hemp. I think it might be a nonprofit or maybe a trade association. And they had a stand there as well, or kind of a booth. So there's a lot happening definitely with the stands there were mostly around sustainable materials, like, I don't know, like mushroom leathers and things like that, and hemp as well.
Why is hemp so good?
So it's fast growing, and I'm trying to remember there's, what else is it good? I think it doesn't need many pesticides. It doesn't use as much water as cotton, for example. Oh, Maureen's put the answer in there, so so Maureen wrote, hemp is grown in the UK, but no way as much as it could. Government is very suspicious of it and applies lots of regulations because it's part of the cannabis family. Yeah, fair enough. But yeah, so those are some of the properties of hemp. Does anyone subscribe to Ethical Consumer here?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so it was, I think, one or two issues ago was fashion, and it would have quite at least a couple of paragraphs, I would think, on hemp in that issue.
Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I think we've learned an enormous lot. And I think what is always frightening is you need to keep getting these messages. As Sarah, you said, you maybe need it every day. I certainly feel I need it every time I drift through any clothes shops. Yeah, I just want to proudly say this is made from plastic bottles. So, so I'm going to pass you back to Jane, but I'd like to finish, if I could, with my little bit by saying a very, very big thank you to Madelyn. A very interesting talk and spot on in giving us food for thought plus actions to do.